Hello again and welcome back to another FMOD and Unity tutorial where today we're doing something really cool actually. We're looking at how we can blend between different 2D background ambiances based on where the player is in your game world. So imagine if I was controlling a little first or third person character here. We'd hear like a background kind of wind, bird, background sound as we're outside, but then as we walk into the building, it will blend into a different background ambience, more appropriate for being indoors. And then as you pass in between rooms, we'll also be able to blend between different room tones as well. Now, normally in these videos, what I do is I try and show you everything you need to know how to set this up from scratch yourself. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to show you how to set up everything within Unity, but the script side of things, the C# code, what I'm actually going to do is leave links on my website for you to copy and paste the scripts from and then into your project instead of me going over them line by line. The only reason why is this has taken me stupidly long to prepare for, write, set up, etc. Half of it was me postponing this, but the other half of it was just the script was really massive. So like I say, you can get these scripts from my website, just copy and paste them into your project. I'll also annotate all the lines so you can understand what they mean if you are interested in learning on how they work. Cool, so that is everything. So let's get started. I think the first thing I'll do is I'll show you my FMOD project to see what sounds we're working with. So I've got 4 different events here. They're just, like I say, ambience events. I'm just going to play sort of 2D looping files. They're really simple. I've got one that sort of represents the outside of that sort of area, which I'll play for you now. Cool. So it's just some birds, some wind. I've got an indoor quiet sound. There we go. And a loud small room. Oh, I don't need to play them all. Cool. So let's have a look at the outside ambience to start with. So yeah, I've just imported a file and I've told it to loop, basically. I've done a few other things I could show you if you're interested. Like I say, this is the loop region that's, looping the main cursor of our event. If I click on the region here, you can see I've set an offset by 50%. What that means is when this region is told to play, it's going to start halfway through the actual file. But then what I've done is I right-clicked it and I clicked Add Random Modulation. And then that popped up a little window. Let me quickly find it. So here we go, Start Offset. And what that does is it basically adds a bit of a randomization to it. So every time I play this event, it will start something random, and that just makes things a bit more varied. I've also got some modulation on the volume, and that just sort of fades it in a little bit, okay? Just as you can see there's a little bit of attack or slow sort of attack time there. Those are kind of aesthetic things, really. The main thing you need to know about this event and the rest of them is 2 things. The first is, as I say, they're 2D, so there's no 3D spatialization. It's just always going to be playing sort of no matter where we're positioned in the world. Well, until we walk in this building. I'll show you that later. The second thing is I've automated the volume. So what I've done, as you can see, I've added this parameter up here called Ambience Volume Control. And you can do that by pressing the plus sign, add parameter sheet. You can create a new parameter, and then you just fill these details out. So you give your parameter a name, set a range. I think my range is between 0 and 1, an initial value, and a parameter scope. I think you can leave this as, I don't think it really matters, but I would recommend global because this is kind of a global thing we're doing, basically, setting these large background sounds that will fill out a level. There's only ever, or there should be only ever, one instance of each of these events playing at a time, so global makes sense. But regardless, yeah, you fill all those out. Once you've done that, you can click on your parameter. Then you can right-click on the master fader and you can add automation. And then what that'll do is bring a little drop down like this, and you can just automate it. So as you can see, when this parameter is at 1, the volume is at 0 decibels. Hopefully that's not too small for you to see. And then when it's at 0, the volume is at 0 decibels. So what we're going to do in Unity is we're going to interact with this parameter and use it to fade our ambience in and out as we enter that building. Okay, so that's pretty much it. On the FMOD side, you basically just repeat everything I've showed you here for your other ambiances, okay? Cool, so let's have a look at how we get interactive with, or interact with, those ambiances in Unity. Now the first thing we're going to need is a manager script, which is one of the 2 scripts I've created for you to use and copy from my website. What we're going to do is we're going to start by creating an empty game object, and we're going to stick that manager script on that object. So I'm just going to call this game object FMOD Ambiance Manager. There we go. Then let's make that a little bit bigger as well. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Add Component, and the component I want to add is called FMOD Ambiance Manager. And again, like I say, this is the one of 2 scripts I've created for you. So again, if you are planning to follow along and use these tools, please by all means do. To create your own scripts, what you do is just right-click somewhere in your project tab at the bottom, click Create, C# Script, and then what you'll do is give the script a name. It is quite important that you name the script the same as what I've named mine. So as you can see, the script is called FMOD Ambiance Manager. So make sure you call yours that. Although I should say as well, make sure there's no spaces in between the name. So capitalization needs to be exactly the same, but no spaces. If you do that, it should work perfectly for you if you just copy everything from my website and paste it into the script wherever it is, by right click in, click open, and then go into Visual Studio to paste everything in. But like I say, let's have a look at how we set things up. So the first section in our script is called Ambience Events. This is where we basically get those ambiances that we just looked at in FMOD from. Now, the first thing we need to do is tell it how many ambience events we have. So as you saw, I've got 4, so I'm going to type in 4, and then we need to find them. So using this little search tool, I'm going to look through my events, and I'm going to click, the first one was outside, so I'm going to click outside, and then I'm basically just going to go through all the ambiances. So the next one was indoor quiet small, then the next one loud small, and so on. Brilliant. Next thing you want to do is enter the name of that parameter we looked at that's controlling the volume of your ambiances. So let's go back to FMOD quickly. I called mine Ambience Volume Control. I'm going to right click it, click Enter Parameter. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the name of that with Control C. And then I'm going to go back to Unity and Control V. This is on PC, by the way. Obviously, and paste the name of it into that section here. And again, the name needs to be identical to what it's called in FMOD in order for, the script to find it, basically. Great. The next section is called Play an Event when the game starts. So yeah, when the game starts, we obviously want to hear one of these events. The event obviously is going to be the outside one. So this is where we tell our script to start by playing the outside event. So make sure play on start is ticked. What you'll want to do is select one of your events via a number. As you can see, they've all got this element number next to them, 0, 1, 2, and 3. Well, what you want to do is look at the ambience that you want to play. So for me, it's outside. Look at this number, and then you just want to fill that number into this section here. So thankfully, because outside is 0, I can leave this section as 0. Now you'll also want to give a value for your volume control parameter. What value do you want it to start at, right? Well, because I want to hear my ambience, let's go back to FMOD one more time and quickly close that. Let's have a look at the parameter. Here we are. So remember I was showing you earlier, when the parameter is at a value of 1, its maximum range, that's when we hear the ambience. And it's when it's at 0 that we don't hear the ambience. So because of that, going back to Unity, I want to make sure that my volume control parameter starts at a value of 1, so I actually hear the ambience. Great, so the final section is called When Will Event Instances Be Created? Now we've got 2 options. We can either create all of our event instances all on start, as soon as the game starts, or on the fly, which means as the events need to be played. Now, what does that mean? Well, when working with FMOD events, or any audio events really, we can create multiple instances of an event. If we wanted to, we could play 5 or 10 or 20 copies of our outside ambience all at once. Don't know why you'd want to do that, but in theory, we could do that. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we'll never want to. We only ever want one instance of each of these events playing. That's why I was talking about the fact that we could set that parameter to global earlier. Remember, we've got 4 events. So do we create all the instances of our events at once? Well, we could, but we only ever need to hear one at a time, so that might be a little bit unnecessary. Or we can sort of just create the events as and when we need them, right? So that's the difference between on the start and on the fly. You might choose on the start for the sake of performance. If you use on the start, everything's sort of got to be loaded and created, prepared as the sort of game loads, right? Which means there's less likely for a performance drop in the middle of the game. I mean, I'm working in a small little demo project with 4 instances, so that's not going to happen. But if you're working with a bigger project, that might be something to consider. On the fly, because you would be doing it on the fly, that might save loading time, so you get into the game sooner. But like I say, you're sort of doing more processing as the game plays. So yeah, just something I threw in there. Something for you to consider, basically. Great, now that is everything to do with the manager script sorted. What will happen now is we'll have an event play whilst we walk around outside. Now, how do we swap the ambience from one of the indoor ambiences when the player walks into the building? Well, that's when the second script comes into play. First, what we need to do is create what's called a trigger box, right? What we're going to do is we're going to put this trigger box, an imaginary box, well, it's not imaginary, it's invisible, like it was the word I'm looking for. We're going to put that around the entrance of this building, okay? And then we're going to use that to detect when the player is trying to enter the building, okay? So let's start by creating a 3D object. We're going to create a cube. There we go. What we want to do is start by positioning this cube where our entrance is. There we go, that will roughly do. Then what I want to do is I want to make it bigger. So let's go over to the scale settings here, the transform component, and let's stretch it out a bit so it covers the width, make it nice and high, and make it nice and long too, so it covers the sort of entrance corridor. Now, if it was not a corridor, and it was just like a sort of doorway, you would still make it about this size. You just make sure it covers the doorway. I'll explain what I mean by that in a little bit later on. Okay, next we want to get rid of some components over here. So we obviously want this to be invisible for the most part. Well, certainly to the player. So let's remove the cube mesh filter and the mesh renderer. Don't need that. All we need is this box collider. And in fact, in order to make this a trigger box that actually detects when the player enters it, it's very important that you make sure this box is ticked, is trigger, okay? Great. Let's also give this a name as well. So I'm going to call this trigger box audio blender. Blender 1. There we go. Next, let's add the second script. That is going to be called Trigger Box Audio Blender. So again, if you're following along and you're copying the script from my website, make sure the name of your script is exactly the same as this, but without the spaces in, but capitalization all the same. Now, the first thing you should notice immediately, on my screen anyway, is that these lines appeared, right? This is part of what the script does, as some debuggy tool stuff. It will display these lines so you can actually see it whilst you're working with the box. And you've also got these green and red boxes or squares, which I'll explain in a bit. If you're not seeing them, then what you want to do is click the gizmos button at the top of either your game or your scene tabs, and that should display them for you. Now, these green and red sections, so these sort of refer to entrance and exit points of the box. This is where we want the player to enter and exit from. So obviously I don't want them stuck in the wall like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm quickly going to rotate my box on the y-axis by 90 degrees. There we go. It kind of matters which end, the red and the green one, but it also doesn't matter. For now, just put the green one so it's facing the outside and the red so it's facing the inside, and I'll explain what they do in a bit. Finally, just make sure your box covers the entire entrance. There's no gaps, so the player can't sneak past it, and that looks good to me. Great. Right, let's have a look at how we set up our audio blender. First section, choose object identification method. So in this game, I've got a little player character. Let's have a look at him. So it's just a capsule. This comes in the, I forget what it's called, the standard assets package, which you can get from the Unity Asset Store. It's just a capsule with a camera on that control with WASD, right? Now, we need to identify this object, right? We need to tell our box that it's looking for this player character, and we only want the ambiances to blend when this thing walks through it. So how do we identify it? Well, let's go back to the script. We've got two options. We can either identify the object that we're interested in by a tag or by the object specifically. Now, if you choose tag, what you'll want to do is enter the tag given to that object in this field here. Now, by default, it will assume that the tag is player because you're probably going to want to track the player, whatever the player is controlling. So let's have a look at the object and make sure its tag is player. It is indeed. Now, if you don't have player as a tag, you can create it yourself. Just click add tag. List is empty, add player. I think it's a default one, so you shouldn't need to, but that's how you create tags. Alternatively, we could just select the object itself. So in that scenario, we change tag to game object. We now don't need anything there. what we want to use is this field instead, target object. So what you would do instead is you would click the parent, the highest sort of parent object that your player is controlling, which for me is this rigid body FPS controller, and you would drag it into this field here, like so. And there you go. Now it will recognize or look for the player character. Now the next section is called choose response type. I think I'm going to come back to this and explain it to you in a little bit. What I want to do is have a look at this section here, call functions with trigger. Because this is the area where we're actually going to call the events, the FMOD events that we gave our FMOD Ambiance Manager script, okay? So let's have a look at how we use these. Now, these boxes are called Unity events. They basically allow you to trigger functions within scripts from almost anywhere within your project, so they're really helpful. As you can see, we've got a few to work with. We've got one called on enter point A, on enter point B, on stay, exit A, and exit B. Now, A and B, these refer to these green and red squares. A is the green square and B is the red square. So whenever the player enters the green square, they're entering point A, which means anything we put inside this box is going to activate, it's going to trigger. So this will be where we might want to play a new event and thus play a new ambience for our player to hear. Then if they were to turn around and leave point A, then this one would trigger exit point A. Then of course, if they didn't turn around, let's say they continued all the way through and they exited at point B, this one would trigger at the bottom, exit point B, and so on. The final one is this one in the middle, on stay. This is basically going to constantly trigger so long as our target object, our player, is inside this box somewhere. It doesn't matter where, as long as they're in there, this is going to be doing stuff. Okay, so let's start setting things up for our ambiances. So let's play our first ambience. What we're going to want to do is come to on enter point A. Let's say the player's entered the square. Let's click a plus, and we're going to add a new thing to trigger. What we want to do is access the Ambiance Manager, so we're going to drag the object over to this little box here. Then what we want to do is select the script that we added to that object, which was called FMOD Ambiance Manager. And then we want to select a specific function, basically a thing to do. Well, the thing we want to do is play an ambience, so let's select play ambience. And now finally we've got a number to fill in. Now remember earlier, going back to the manager, we have these element numbers which are now associated to our FMOD ambiances, right? Well, I want to play the indoor large room ambience, right? As the player starts to enter this building. The element number is 3, so I'm going to go back to my trigger box. I'm going to change that 0 to a 3 like that, nice and easy. Now let's say that the player entered the trigger box. They've gone all the way through now and they've exited at point B. Well, what we now want to do is tell the outdoor one to stop playing, right? So let's come to on exit point B. Let's also, once again, let's drag the manager object. Let's select our script. This time we want stop ambience, okay? So let's click on that. And then the number we want is actually 0. Remember, the number for the outdoor ambience, for me anyway, is element 0. So I can leave that as it is. Now, what if the player went the other way around? Let's say they started inside and they wanted to walk outside. Or they're going to enter point B this time. So let's come to enter point B. As they enter point B, remember they're already hearing the indoor ambience now. We want the outside ambience to start. So let's do the exact same thing as we did at the top here. We're going to tell an ambience to play. So I'm going to try and speed through this now. And the ambience we want to play is 0, so I can leave that as 0. Then let's say they leave point A. Well, let's come to on exit point A, do the same thing. And this time we want the indoor ambience to stop. So I'm going to go stop ambience. I'm going to change this number to 3, nice and easy. Okay, so that's all fine and dandy. The ambiances will now play and stop at the right time. But remember, we want to control, we want to blend them. So we want the volume of the outside one to go down and we want the inside one to go up as we enter. So let's have a look at the on stay because that's when the magic happens. Now, this gets a little bit complicated, but not too complicated. As always, we're going to want to access our manager. So let's start by doing that. Let's have a look at some of the scripts inside of it. Now, the first thing we'll want to do here is we'll want to use this select ambience function. What this is going to do is basically going to literally select an ambience, okay? It's going to tell our script to focus on one of the 2 ambiences that we're interested in. So let's start with 0, as that's one of them. We then want to do something else with it. So obviously 0 represents the outside ambience. What we want to do with that is we want to decrease the volume as the player goes from A to B. Let's tell the onStay Unity event to do a second thing. Again, Let's grab the manager, have a look at the function options. What we now want to do is select one of these two functions here. Decrease parameter via A to B or increase parameter via A to B. Well, as I just said, we want to decrease the one that we've just selected, which is the outside ambience. So I'm going to select decrease parameter via A to B. Now, in order for this to work, the script needs a trigger box. You need to tell it a specific trigger box that you want the script to read and check the player's position within, because it's going to use the position that the player is in within this box to bring the volume in and out. If the player's in a tiny bit, it's only going to bring it down a little bit. If the player's closer to B, then it's going to bring it down a lot, okay? Now, obviously, in theory, we could have multiple trigger boxes in this game world. So which one do we want it to use? Well, we want it to use trigger box 1. So let's click on its name and drag it into this box here. Great. Now we need to do the exact same thing for the other ambience. So let's add another thing for the on-stay event to do. This time we want to select the other ambience. So again, let's get the manager script. Let's look at functions. So we want select ambience. This time I'm going to change it to free. And we also want to tell the volume of free to change. So again, get the manager. Now, again, we want one of these two functions here. This time, for ambience number 3, we actually want the volume to increase as the player travels from point A to point B. So we want to use increase parameter via A to B. And again, we need to give it a trigger box. So let's give it trigger box 1. Now that is pretty much the basics of everything. So, moment of truth, let's hope that I remembered how to set this up correctly. Let's see if this works in our game. Oh, well, there we go. Straight away, we can hear the outside ambience. That's brilliant. Now let's have a look what happens if we walk through this trigger box. Okay, here we go. Fantastic. Let's go the other way. Nice, that works brilliantly. Now you might be able to see some text there and you'll notice a little yellow line has appeared. Well, what you can do, you can come down to this section here which says debug tools. By the way, I forgot to mention this earlier. In order to see everything, make sure this box is ticked. I should have said that at the beginning. Anyway, come to text settings. You can change the color of your text, the size of it and stuff all here. So I believe it's text color. Let's change that now and see if that works. So that's about a yellow, yeah, that works. We can sort of see it a bit better now. And then font size is down here, I think, so 10. Seems to make it smaller. What about 100? Too big. Okay, you get the idea. You can change your sort of debug settings here. What about a nice solid 30? A bit big, but that'll do. You'll also see there's a percentage here as well, right? If I quickly go back into the game, it will tell me sort of how much progress the player has made through the trigger box, which is also helpful. Sweet, so that worked really well. Yeah, now let's do it again. This time I'm going to try and set this up for this entranceway here and blend it to a different ambience when the player enters this smaller room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste my trigger box. I'm going to reuse it. I'm going to change the name of this one to trigger box number 2. And I'm going to quickly position it over the entranceway. And I'm also going to rescale it ever so slightly so it's nice and wide and covers the area. Great, okay. Now, what is the difference between these two entranceways? Well, the main difference is that we've got these walls here for this first one. With this first one, the player was forced to enter the trigger box via point A and point B, okay? They had to touch these green and red squares. However, we sadly don't really have that luxury here. The player sort of has the option to come in from the side of the trigger box, okay? Now, originally, the first trigger box was only calculating the player, or rather reading, the player's position within the trigger box relative to one axis, okay? It didn't really matter where the player was in, what is that, the x-axis in this case. It only mattered in the z-axis, okay? Now, in order to fix that, what we need to do is we need to select this toggle box here, multi-axis, and by doing that, you'll see this yellow square. My mind went blank. Square has appeared. This is the halfway mark. Now, the halfway mark, this is very important. It needs to be sitting in this wall. The player has to pass through this halfway mark in order to work, otherwise we're going to get some issues. What we can do is I can adjust the position of the halfway mark with this slider, okay? Now let's say I left it here. If the player entered from here, basically, this little section here, and skipped the halfway mark, what would happen is we'd jump to the other ambience, which isn't what we want, okay? So, like I say, very important that we keep that marker nice and flush with the wall so the player can't skip it, okay? Feel free, if you want, by the way, the reason why that slider's there is because I could set it up like this. What this would do is give a sort of asymmetrical blend to my ambiances. So the ambiances would blend between each other sort of very quickly as we enter into this room, and then very slowly as we sort of pass through the doorway or the entranceway. So, you know, depending on your environment and the rooms you're entering and exiting, you might want to change that, but I'm going to leave mine at 50 and again reposition my box so that the halfway mark is in the middle. Great. Now that that's set up, what we want to do is change some of the stuff in our Unity events when the player enters the trigger box. So when the player enters point A, we now no longer want to play ambience 3, we want to play a different ambience. I'm going to now play ambience number 1 of mine. If the player were to enter point B, the red box, I want to play 3, because remember now we're returning back to the big room where 3 was originally playing. So as I enter point B, I want 3 to start playing. Now let's control the volume. Let's start by selecting one of our ambiances. Thankfully, because we've copied this box, I've already got the select ambience function ready to go. I just need to give it an ambience. I'm going to start with ambience number 1. And what do I want to do with it? Well, let's have a look at our two functions. As the player enters the box and goes from point A to B, ambience number 1, I want to increase, don't I? Because we're going into the smaller room, this new ambience, I want to slowly bring up. So I'm going to click increase parameter via A to B. And because we're using a different trigger box, I'm just going to make sure that trigger box number 2 is selected, which it is. Fantastic. Cool. Then we want to select the other ambience, which is 3. That's already there. Perfect. This time, as the player goes from point A to point B, I want to decrease ambience number 3. So I'm going to click decrease parameter via A to B. Finally, as we exit point A, that means we are entering the big room. So I want ambience number 1 to, no, not 12, ambience 1 to stop. And as we exit point B, I'm entering the small room. So I want ambience number 3 to stop. Brilliant. Nearly there. Let's change the color of our debug text so we can see it this time. Change the font size to about 25. And that should be everything. Great, let's give it a test. Okay, great. Now it is time to enter the second room, but this time I'm going to specifically enter from the side. So I'm going to avoid this green square and enter like so. And then I'm going to do a little curve. So let's see what happens. There we go. Fantastic, there we go. So that blended really well, didn't it? So as you can see, it doesn't matter which angle we approach from, we're always going to get that smooth blend. In fact, what I'm going to do now, let's turn the boxes off so we can actually appreciate how this sort of will work. So if I walk in like so, nice and smooth. Fantastic, it all works really well. Great. Okay, so with that, yeah, that is everything. Really hope you enjoyed this. Like I say, if you want to use this tool, please do. You can get it from my website. Like I say, just copy and paste this, well, create new scripts, copy and paste these text files, and you should be good to go. There'll be better annotations here so you can read, find out how they work. Again, apologies I haven't shown you the script in this video, but hopefully you will be able to get this up with no pain issues whatsoever. If you want to support me, then you can check out my website where I have tools for learning about technical audio implementations, predominantly with FMOD and Unity. Or you can sign up to my newsletter. You can get free lessons from my online courses there if you're interested. And yeah, let me know if there's anything else you want to see from this YouTube channel. And that's everything. So I've been Henry Scott. Thank you very much for watching. Happy New Year. It's January for me. It's just turned 2023. And I'll see you in the next one.